The wind had not stopped for 3 days. It dragged across the mountain like a living thing, hissing through the pines, scraping against stone, carrying with it the dry scent of snow that had not yet fallen. The sky hung low, heavy, and gray, pressing down on the ridges, as if the world itself were trying to sink into the earth. Elias Crow walked alone along the narrow mountain trail. His boots crushed frozen dirt with slow, deliberate weight. A long rifle rested across his back, worn smooth from years of use. His coat, thick and dark, moved only slightly in the wind, as if even the storm knew better than to push him too hard. Behind him, 3 donkeys followed. They were not strong animals, not impressive. Their ribs showed through dull coats, and their hooves struck uneven rhythms against the path. But they had survived these mountains longer than most men ever did, and today they refused to move. Elias stopped when the first rope went tight in his hand. He did not turn right away. The wind shifted, brushing past his ear, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Then he looked back. The lead donkey had planted its hooves into the ground, stiff head, pulled back. The other 2 had done the same, their bodies angled not along the trail, but slightly off it toward the trees that grew thick along the edge of the ridge. Elias said nothing. He stepped forward once more, testing the rope. It did not give. The animal pulled back harder, not in panic, in insistence. Elias narrowed his eyes. The second donkey let out a low, uneasy sound, its ears twitching forward. Then, without warning, it jerked sideways, pulling the rope across Elias's hand. The third followed. All 3 moved together, not forward, not along the path, but down, toward the slope that dropped away into the darker line of the forest below. Elias's grip tightened. He leaned his weight-back boots, digging into the ground. For a moment it was a silent struggle between man and animal. Then the rope shifted again. Stronger this time. All 3 pulling. Not wild, not frightened. Certain. Elias exhaled slowly through his nose. Then he let them lead. The trail disappeared within a few steps. The ground grew uneven, scattered with broken branches, and patches of old snow hardened into ice. The trees thickened their trunks, rising close together, blocking out what little light the sky offered. The donkeys moved carefully now, picking their way between roots and stones. They knew exactly where they were going. Elias followed behind them, his eyes scanning the forest, his body alert. The wind grew quieter here, or maybe it was just different. Muffled, like something was pressing down on the air itself. The first smell came faintly. Something wrong. Not rot. Not exactly, but close. Elias slowed. The led donkey stopped again. Its ears stood forward completely still. The other 2 shifted uneasily behind it. Then came the sound. So faint, it might have been the wind slipping between rocks. A breath. Elias turned his head slightly. There it was again. Not wind, not animal. Human. Barely there. A broken, dragging sound, as if someone were pulling air into lungs that had already decided to stop working. Elias's hand moved without hesitation. The knife slid free from his belt with a quiet scrape. He stepped past the donkeys. The ground ahead had been disturbed. Not by animals. The soil was torn uneven, scattered in a rough pattern, as if something or someone had struggled there. Half buried beneath a thin layer of dirt and frozen leaves, something moved. Elias crouched. He drove the knife into the soil and began to dig. Fast. His hands followed, tearing through the cold earth, ignoring the sharp edges of stone, the bite of frozen ground against skin. A piece of fabric appeared. Dark. Torn. Then a hand. Small. Still. Elias's movements grew faster. He cleared more dirt, revealing a body curled inward, as if trying to protect itself even in the moment of being buried. A woman. Her face was pale beneath streaks of mud and dried blood. Her lips were cracked, her breath shallow, almost invisible in the cold air. Her arms were wrapped tight around something beneath her coat. Elias reached down and pulled the fabric aside. A child, no older than a few months. Its skin carried a faint gray tint, its body limp, its chest barely rising. For a moment, everything went still. The wind, the trees, even the donkeys behind him. Elias did not speak. He slid his arms beneath both of them and lifted. The woman's head fell against his shoulder, her breath brushing faintly against his neck. The child did not move at all. Elias turned without hesitation. He carried them back toward the donkeys. One of the animals stepped forward, lowering slightly, as if it understood. Elias laid the woman carefully across its back, adjusting her weight so she would not fall. Then he placed the child against her chest, pressing it into the warmth that remained. The donkey shifted, but did not resist. Elias grabbed the rope. He did not look back at the place where he had found them. He only pulled, and the donkeys followed, back toward the mountain, back toward whatever chance of life still remained. The town of Red Hollow did not care. It sat at the base of the mountains like a scar, carved into the land, its buildings crooked, its streets lined with mud and broken stone. Smoke rose from chimneys, but it carried no warmth, only the smell of coal and sweat. And something else, something colder. Clara Whitaker stood in the center of it. Her wrists were bound with rough rope pulled tight enough to cut into the skin. Dirt streaked her face. Her hair hung loose and tangled, clinging to her cheeks where tears had dried and frozen. The crowd surrounded her. They did not stand close. They circled her, leaving space in the middle, as if she carried something that might spread. Voices moved through the air, low at first, then louder, angrier. A rock struck her shoulder. She flinched but did not fall. Another hit the ground near her feet. A man stepped forward and spat. No one stopped him. At the edge of the circle, a boy cried. His voice broke against the noise, small and desperate. "Mama!" Clara turned her head, searching for him. He stood held back by one of the deputies, his small hands reaching his face, red with tears. She took a step toward him. The rope snapped tight. She stumbled. A hand grabbed her arm and yanked her back into place. Sheriff Dalton Briggs stepped forward. He was a large man, thick through the shoulders, his coat clean despite the dirt that covered everything else in the town. His badge caught what little light there was, glinting like something sharper than metal. He looked down at Clara with no expression at all, only certainty. She tried to speak. Her voice cracked before the words could form. I did not take anything. It came out weak, barely enough to carry. Dalton did not respond. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch. He held it up for the crowd to see. Gold dust spilled slightly from the edge. Murmurs moved through the people. Proof. He said it simply. Found in her home. Clara shook her head. No. Her voice broke harder this time. No. A slap cut her words off. Her body twisted with the force, and she fell to her knees in the dirt. The crowd did not react. Dalton stepped closer. You stole from the mine. His voice carried easily. Calm, controlled, and now you lie. Clara's hands pressed into the ground as she tried to push herself up. I never. Another strike, this time from behind, a boot against her back. She collapsed fully, the breath forced from her lungs. The boy screamed. The deputy holding him tightened his grip. Dalton looked down at her. The law is clear. His words fell like stones. Theft is punished. Your land is forfeit. Your home is no longer yours. Clara lifted her head slowly. Her eyes searched the faces around her. No one stepped forward. No one spoke. Not one voice rose in her defense. Dalton turned slightly. Take her out. Leave her beyond the ridge. If she comes back. He paused. A faint smile touched his mouth. You know what to do. Two men stepped forward. They grabbed her by the arms and dragged her across the ground. Her feet scraped behind her, leaving uneven lines in the dirt. She did not fight anymore. She only turned her head once more, toward her son. His cries followed her until they were swallowed by distance. And then even that was gone. The mountains did not welcome her. They never had. Clara stumbled as she was thrown from the back of the wagon. Her body hit the snow-covered ground hard enough to drive the air from her chest. The men did not look at her again. The wagon turned. The sound of its wheels faded quickly. Silence followed. A deep, endless silence that stretched across the mountains like a warning. Clara lay still for a moment. Then she moved. Slowly, painfully. Her arms tightened around the small bundle she had refused to let go of. Her son. His breath came shallow against her chest. Too light. Too weak. She pushed herself up. Her legs trembled beneath her, barely able to hold her weight. The wind cut through her thin clothes, immediately biting into her skin like teeth. She took one step, then another. There was no path, no direction, only white and stone, and trees that offered no shelter. The sky darkened faster than it should have. Clouds gathering. Heavy. Low. A storm was coming. Clara kept moving. She had no choice. The child stirred weakly in her arms. A faint sound escaped him. Not a cry. Not anymore. She looked down at him, her vision blurring. Stay with me. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. Please. Her feet slipped. She fell to her knees. Snow soaked through her clothes instantly. The cold crawled up her body, slow and unstoppable. She forced herself back up. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold him. Hours passed, or minutes. Time had no meaning here, only the cold. Only the wind, only the weight in her arms growing heavier with every step. She saw the rocks before she felt them, a small break in the ground, a shallow hollow between two outcroppings. Not much, but something. She moved toward it, her steps uneven, her breath coming in sharp, broken pulls. She crouched inside, pulling the child close. The wind still reached them, but not as strong, not as direct. She tried to cover him with her coat, tried to shield him with her own body. Her fingers were numb. She could not feel them anymore. The child's breathing slowed. No. Her head dropped forward, pressing against his. Stay. Stay. Her body leaned further over him, her strength fading. The cold crept deeper. Her eyes closed, just for a moment, just long enough. Outside, the wind shifted, and somewhere in the distance, hoofbeats moved across the frozen ground, then stopped, and everything went quiet again. Elias did not slow as the trees thinned and the slope began to rise again. The donkeys moved with a strange urgency, now their hooves striking harder against the frozen ground, their breaths pushing white clouds into the cold air. The woman's body shifted slightly across the back of the lead animal, her head lolling with each step, but she did not wake. The child did not move at all. By the time the cabin came into view, the sky had already begun to darken. It stood alone against the mountain-rough wood, darkened by years of weather. Its roof bowed slightly under old snow. Smoke did not rise from its chimney. Elias did not hesitate. He pulled the door open with one hand, the wood groaning against the hinges and stepped inside. Cold air filled the room. The fire pit was dead, only gray ash resting at the bottom. The bed against the far wall was little more than a frame of wood and worn blankets. Elias moved quickly. He lifted the woman from the donkey and carried her inside, laying her down across the bed. Her body barely resisted the motion, her limbs falling where they landed. The child he placed beside her. Still no movement. Elias turned immediately. He knelt by the fire pit, hands moving with practiced precision. Dry wood. Kindling. A spark struck from steel. Once. Twice. On the third, flame caught. It grew slowly at first, then stronger. Pushing warmth back into the room inch by inch, Elias stood again and crossed back to the bed. The woman's face was pale beneath the dirt, her lips barely parted as she struggled for breath. Her arms, even in unconsciousness, remained curled inward, as if still protecting the child. Elias reached down and pulled her coat open. The child's face was worse. Gray. Still. He did not pause. He lifted the child into his hands and brought it closer to the fire. His fingers pressed lightly against the small chest. Nothing. His jaw tightened. He sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, pulling the child against his own chest, wrapping it inside his coat. One hand moved to the back of its neck, holding it steady, while the other rubbed firmly along its back. Once. Twice. Again. A long moment passed. Then another. The fire crackled behind him. The wind struck the walls outside. Still. Nothing. Elias leaned forward slightly. He pressed his mouth close to the child's face and exhaled slow and steady. Then again, his hand continued its motion stronger now. Come on. The words were barely sound, more breath than voice. He did not stop. The child's body shifted, so faint it might have been imagined. Elias froze for half a second, then pressed again. A small, broken gasp tore through the air. The child's chest jerked. A weak cry followed. Thin, fragile, but alive. Elias exhaled slowly, the tension leaving his shoulders in a single breath. He adjusted his hold. Bringing the child closer to the fire, shielding it from the cold that still clung to the room. Behind him, the woman stirred, her eyes opened halfway unfocused. Searching, she saw movement, the outline of a man, large, dark against the firelight. Her breath caught. She tried to move, but her body refused. The child cried again. Her head turned sharply. Elias stepped toward her without a word. He placed the child carefully into her arms. Her hands trembled as they closed around it. Tears slid down the sides of her face, cutting through the dirt. She looked up at him. Fear, confusion, desperation. All of it in her eyes. Elias met her gaze for a moment. Then he turned away. No questions, no explanations, only action. He crossed the room, grabbed a pot, filled it with water from a barrel near the wall, and set it over the fire. The night deepened outside. Inside, the cabin slowly began to breathe again. The next morning came without light. Clouds had swallowed the sky, turning everything beyond the windows into a dull gray blur. Snow began to fall not long after, soft at first, then heavier, carried sideways by the wind. Elias was already outside. The axe rose and fell in steady rhythm, splitting wood into clean pieces that fell into the growing pile beside him. His breath came slow and even, unchoked by the cold. Inside, Clara sat against the wall, wrapped in blankets that still smelled faintly of smoke and pine. The child rested in her arms, his breathing shallow, but steady now. She had not spoken, Not once. Her eyes followed Elias through the small window as he worked. There was something unnatural about the quiet. Not the quiet of peace. The quiet of a place where words had long ago stopped mattering. The door opened. Cold air rushed in with him. He stepped inside, dropping the wood near the fire before closing it again. Snow clung to his coat, melting slowly as he moved. Clara tightened her grip on the child instinctively. Elias noticed. He said nothing. He simply moved to the fire, adjusting the logs feeding the flames until they burned stronger. The warmth spread further into the room. Clara shifted slightly. "Thank you." The words came out rough, unused. Elias did not look at her. He reached for a small cloth, dipped it into the heated water, and brought it over. He knelt in front of her. For a moment she tensed. Then she stayed still. He pressed the cloth gently against her forehead, wiping away dirt and dried blood. His movements were careful, controlled, as if each one had been measured long before he made it. She watched him, trying to understand. Why? But the question never left her lips. He moved to her arm, next cleaning the cuts left by rope and stone. When he finished, he stood and returned to the fire. The silence came back, but it was different now, less sharp, less empty. Hours passed. The storm outside grew stronger. Wind slammed against the cabin walls, rattling the wood, forcing thin lines of snow through the edges of the door. Clara fed the child, with what little she had left. Her body was still weak, but it responded. Barely. Enough. Elias stepped outside again. The wind swallowed him immediately. Clara's eyes followed the door long after it closed. Minutes stretched, then longer. The storm worsened. The walls creaked under the pressure. Snow piled against the door. The child stirred, letting out a soft cry. Clara rocked him gently, her eyes never leaving the door. He should have been back. Something was wrong. A sudden crack echoed outside. Loud, sharp, like a tree splitting under weight. Clara flinched. The child cried louder. She held him tighter. The door did not open. Time dragged. The fire burned lower. Her breathing quickened. Then, without warning, the door burst inward. The wind roared into the cabin, carrying snow and ice with it. Elias stepped through. His coat was torn at the shoulder, dark with blood that had already begun to freeze. In one hand, he carried a bundle of roots and leaves wrapped in cloth. He shut the door behind him with force, leaning his weight against it until it held. For a moment he stood there breathing hard. Then he moved. Straight to the fire. He dropped the bundle beside it and knelt, his hands already working. Clara stared at the blood. "You are hurt." Her voice shook. Elias ignored it. He crushed the herbs with a stone, mixing them with water, his movements fast, urgent. The child coughed, a weak, struggling sound. Elias turned immediately. He took the mixture and moved to Clara, pushing the cloth toward her. "Hold him." She obeyed without thinking. Elias tilted the child's head slightly and pressed the liquid to his lips. Most of it spilled. Some went in. They waited. The storm screamed outside. The cabin shook. The child's breathing hitched, stopped, then returned. Stronger. A small sound escaped him. Not pain, not fear. Something closer to life. Clara broke. Tears came without control, her body shaking with them. Elias leaned back slightly, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to show he had been holding it. For the first time, she looked at him not as something to fear, but as something that had pulled them back from the edge. Outside, the storm did not stop. But inside, something had changed. Something that would not break as easily as wood under snow. The storm passed, but it left the mountain changed. Snow lay deep across the land, covering tracks, softening edges, turning the world into something quiet and dangerous. The sky cleared slowly, revealing a pale sun that gave no warmth. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low but steady. Clara moved carefully now, her strength returning in small, fragile pieces. She fed the child, wrapped him tighter, checked his breathing more times than she could count. Elias said little. He repaired what the storm had taken. A loose board here, a cracked beam there, always moving, always watching. It was late afternoon when the horses came. Not the uneven rhythm of wild animals, not the careful steps of travelers. These were controlled, deliberate, many of them. Elias stopped mid-motion. The hammer in his hand went still. His head tilted slightly. Listening, Clara saw the change in him. That was all it took. Her breath caught. The child shifted in her arms, sensing the tension before understanding it. The sound grew louder, hooves crushing snow, leather creaking, metal shifting. Elias moved to the window. He did not pull the curtain aside fully, only enough to see. Sheriff Dalton Briggs sat at the front of the group, his coat heavier now, lined for the cold, his hat pulled low. Behind him, 6 men rode in a loose formation, rifles resting across their laps. They did not rush. They did not need to. They already believed the ending belonged to them. Elias stepped back from the window. He looked at Clara. Only once. That was enough. She understood. He crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled up a section of the floor near the far wall. Beneath it, a narrow space opened, dark and just large enough for a person to fit. Clara hesitated. Elias's hand closed around her arm, firm, unyielding. Go. No softness. No time. She moved. Clutching the child to her chest, she lowered herself into the space. The wood scraped against her shoulders as she settled in, pulling her legs close. Elias replaced the board above her. Darkness swallowed her. The child made a small sound. She pressed him close, covering his mouth gently. Above, boots crossed the floor. Then the door slammed open. Cold air rushed in again, carrying the smell of horses and men. Dalton stepped inside first. He did not remove his gloves, did not brush the snow from his coat. He looked around slowly, taking in the room, the fire, the signs of life. You keep strange company, Crow. His voice was calm, almost amused. Elias stood near the center of the room, his posture loose, his hands empty. The others spread out behind Dalton, Giefel's angled eyes sharp. No one spoke for a moment. The silence stretched. Then Dalton stepped closer. We tracked her here. His gaze did not leave Elias. Woman and a child. Thief and her blood. Elias said nothing. Dalton's smile widened slightly. You always did have a problem with following orders. A flicker passed through Elias's eyes, gone as quickly as it came. Dalton saw it. Of course. He moved a little closer, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel personal. You think hiding them changes anything? He gestured around the cabin. This ends one way. His hand dropped to his side. Find her. The men moved immediately. Boots struck wood. Furniture was pushed aside. One of them kicked at the floorboards near the wall. Clara held her breath beneath them. The child shifted. A soft whimper escaped before she could stop it. Above, everything went still. A boot froze inches from the hidden space. Slowly, the man bent down. His fingers reached for the edge of the board. Then a sound cut through the room. Sharp, loud. A gunshot. The man dropped instantly. Blood spread across the wood. Elias stood where he had been, but now the rifle was in his hands. The second shot came before anyone could react. Another man fell. Chaos exploded inside the cabin. Gunfire tore through the air, splintering wood, ripping through walls. Smoke filled the space, thick and choking. Elias moved like something the mountain itself had shaped. He did not rush, did not waste motion. Each step placed, each shot chosen. A third man lunged forward. Elias drove the rifle into his chest, then fired at point-blank range. The recoil barely moved him. Dalton shouted, pulling his weapon free. Enough! His voice cracked through the noise. The remaining men fell back slightly. Creating space, Elias stood alone on one side of the room, Dalton on the other. Smoke drifted between them. You were supposed to stay buried. Dalton's eyes burned now. Not calm anymore. Not controlled. Elias lowered the rifle slightly. His voice came for the first time. Low, rough. You buried the wrong things. Dalton's jaw tightened. He stepped forward. That woman stole from my mine. Elias did not move. Your mine. The words carried something deeper. Dalton hesitated, only for a fraction. Then anger pushed through. Everything here is mine. The land, the people, the law. Elias's gaze hardened. Behind Dalton, one of the fallen men shifted. Clara saw it through a thin crack in the wood. Her eyes widened. His hand moved toward his gun, toward Elias's back. She pushed the board. It shifted just enough. Her hand reached through, trembling. She grabbed the nearest thing, a small pouch, the same one Dalton had held in the town. Gold dust spilled from its edge. She threw it across the floor. It landed between them. Dalton's eyes snapped to it. For a moment, the room froze again. Clara's voice came from below. Weak, but clear. That is not mine. Dalton's face changed. The control slipped. Just enough. Elias saw it, and that was all he needed. The final shot came fast. Clean. Dalton staggered back, the force driving him into the wall. His weapon slipped from his hand, hitting the floor with a dull sound. He slid down slowly. The room fell silent. Smoke drifted. Snow pushed lightly against the door. Elias stood still for a long moment. Then he lowered the rifle. He walked forward, stopped in front of Dalton, looked down. No anger, no triumph, only an end. He turned away. The floorboard lifted. Clara pulled herself out. The child held tight against her chest. Her body shook, but she did not fall. She looked at Elias, then at the bodies, then back at him. The fear was gone. Something else had taken its place. Morning came quietly. The sky cleared fully this time, the sun breaking through in pale gold light that stretched across the snow. The cabin still stood, scarred, marked, but standing. Elias worked outside, repairing the damage, his movements steady as always. Clara stood in the doorway. The child rested against her shoulder, his breathing strong now, his small hand gripping the fabric of her coat. The 3 donkeys stood nearby, their bodies still, their eyes watching the open land. Clara stepped forward. The snow crunched beneath her feet. She stopped a few steps from Elias. He did not look up immediately. When he did, it was brief. Just enough. She nodded once. A silent understanding. No words were needed. The wind moved softly through the trees. Not harsh anymore. Not cruel. Just there. Elias finished what he was doing and set the tool aside. He walked toward the donkeys. One of them lifted its head slightly as he approached. He reached out, placing his hand against its neck. For a moment, everything was still. The mountain, the cabin, the past. Then the child made a small sound. Elias turned. Clara held him closer, and for the first time, something in Elias's expression shifted. Not much, just enough to be seen. A life that had been pulled from the ground. A fight that had ended. A silence that no longer felt empty. If this story kept you watching until the end, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories.